What's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. And today we have a really exciting video series we're starting here in Diablo 4, and that's going to be our hardcore companion druid build series. Now, this is something I've been brainstorming for quite a while now, and I'm pretty excited to bring this build to you guys. I thought it was a great time to do a companion build now that we're firmly in the mid-season here. I know they've released a couple recent patches that have buffed companions as well as Lightning Storm. And I know they have a patch coming up soon that's going to actually reduce some of the crowd control effects in the dungeons. So I felt if now was the time to do it, let's go ahead and do it. So I want to start off by talking about some of the basics of this build. So the first two skills you see us pick up there are Wind Shear and Lightning Storm. Now I know most people will use Storm Strike, but I wanted to approach the game in a bit of a different way. And I picked those two skills because I wanted to make a more range-oriented build here. So Wind Shear is really great. It doesn't give you that 50% chance to apply vulnerable, but it does give you a 20% chance to apply vulnerable for a bit longer of a duration. And then we picked up the passive there at the top of the tree, Wild Wind Shear. And that just gives us that extra resource generation. So we have those, we have the ability to use our core skill a lot more. And then, like I said, we're going to be utilizing Lightning Storm as our primary damage dealer here in this build. And we're moving into the Primal Lightning Storm there at the top of the tree to give us that chance to immobilize our enemies. And that's what we're going to be playing off of a lot here with this build, that immobilizing our enemies, kind of keeping them under crowd control effects so we can keep that distance from our enemies and deal our damage from the outside, while our companions kind of tank up the enemies more directly. And then you've seen me pick up Bulwark. Now, Bulwark is a very great skill, obviously one of the best skills in the game. It provides us that extra damage reduction with the barrier. Plus, you can scale it into Fortify or to basically deal damage itself. And it also gives us the Unstoppable buff. And that basically makes us crowd control immune. And a lot of people use it for that reason. But I will be moving away from that skill in the mid game, and I will explain why later on in the video. But I feel like I can make a meaningful build given the new patch that's coming that doesn't really rely on Unstoppable or a barrier for damage reduction. And then we started picking up our companions after that. Now, wolves is a really great skill because, like I said, they provide that indirect damage reduction by tanking up some of the monsters that are attacking us, and this can be really useful, especially when we're fighting bosses. Now, the wolves themselves probably need to be a little bit more tankier, but overall, I think they respawn pretty quickly when they die, and it's a really useful skill. And obviously, we're doing a companion build, so we have to have them. And then we did pick up Poison Creeper. Poison Creeper is a great skill as well. It gives us that, and Poison Creeper is not just for companion builds. It's in a ton of other builds. It's a cornerstone for a lot of different builds. And that's because Poison Creeper gives you that big AoE CC crowd control with its active skill that holds monsters in place for a decent amount of time. And also in the early game, it does quite a bit of damage itself, which is worth noting. And then obviously it poisons enemies, and there are a lot of different affixes you get on your gear that play off of poisoned enemies. That can either give you more damage or damage reduction. And then we grabbed up Ravens. Now I do want to stop and talk about Ravens for a second. I'm just going to get on my soapbox here about Ravens. It is probably one of the worst skills in the game. I know that they received a little bit of a buff, but it is still incredibly bad and almost feels like a wasted slot on your skill bar. And that's because the active skill, I mean, not only does it have a decently long cooldown, but it does barely any damage and has such a small area of effect that it almost doesn't even warrant the cast time to use it. And the basic attack itself is awful. So the overall skill is pretty bad. I mean, it does have some decent passives, with the first passive giving you an increased crit chance to enemies that are hit by ravens. And then obviously the second passive, and the reason why we're using ravens, the +2 additional ravens to your companions. So talking about that, why would you use such a terrible skill if you when there are better options? And that largely has to do with two different aspects that are going to be part of our build. and that is Aspect of the Shepherd and Aspect of Stampede. Now, Aspect of Stampede is a pretty unique little aspect. It gives us +1 companion to our companion skills. So that basically means if you have 2 wolves, you now have 3. If you have 1 creeper vine, poison creeper, you now have 2. And if you have 4 ravens from, picking up that last passive, you now have 5. Now, ordinarily, that's not that big of a deal. But because we're using Aspect of the Shepherd, and that'll be the cornerstone of our build here, it gives us an increased amount of damage to our core skills based on the amount of companions we have in the field of play. So we pick up 3 extra companions from the Aspect of Stampede, and then we pick up damage to our core skills based on that Aspect of the Shepherd. Now, Aspect of the Shepherd is really good on its own for companion builds, but when you apply it to a two-handed weapon like we're going to do, if you're new to the game, you may not know this, but when you apply aspects of two-handed weapons, they double in value. So say we have Aspect of the Shepherd on a two-handed staff. The aspect normally may do like 10% increased damage per companion you have summoned. Well, when you apply it to a two-handed weapon, now that 10% will turn into 20%. And my hope is that is what's going to help us scale our damage into the late game. So I definitely, I think those 2 aspects will be a part of our build throughout the entire duration of this gameplay. And I think it will help Lightning Storm kind of scale into the late game in a meaningful way. And that will later be kind of, added on to by some of the different gear pieces that we pick up. And I will be skipping a couple of the uniques that a lot of people pick up. I'm not going to be grabbing up the Crone Staff, and I'm not going to be worried about the Tempest Door Helmet. I feel like those uniques, I didn't want to really make a build that was restrained by uniques, because it can be a bit hit or miss, and I didn't want to have to like grind out a ton of dungeons just to be able to finally get a unique to make my build viable. So we will be skipping them. It doesn't mean we're not going to use any. It just means they're not going to be a big part of our build. But going back to the build itself, you'll see there we finally picked up our 2-point, our last point in our Raven passive to get those +2 Ravens. And we're moving through the game pretty fairly. I am in World Tier 2. And you'll see here we start to scale into the elemental passive tree in the Wrath trees. So I am moving through the game pretty well. They have done some recent buffs to the game. I feel like it's in a much better place even from the initial launch of the game in terms of how smooth the leveling process is, as well as the gearing process, specifically in the early game. So we're having a pretty decent time here. Our damage is pretty good. We're not getting much damage coming in, and we're moving, pretty steadily here. I am doing the Tree of Whispers as my chosen way to kind of gain skill, to gain XP and gear. I really prefer the Tree of Whispers. I know there are more optimal ways to do the leveling process. I just enjoy the different blend of events you can do in different dungeons, just to keep it a little more fresh, because I don't like to, I obviously like to have fun. I don't want to feel like I'm getting bored playing the game. And then, like I said, we're moving into the elemental passive tree. And we picked up our first point there in elemental exposure. And elemental exposure is really good because it helps apply vulnerability to our enemies through the use of our storm skills. Now, normally it wouldn't be a big deal if we were using Storm Strike as our basic attack, but because we're using Wind Shear, we only have that 20% chance to proc vulnerability. And we will be increasing that chance because we'll be pumping up lucky hit chance with this build. But I do like to pick up elemental exposure because it does kind of increase that opportunity to apply vulnerability to the enemies in your environment. And then we end up moving into Charged Atmosphere. Now, that's not for any particular reason other than the fact I don't plan on using Hurricane for this build, and I just didn't want to pick up a point in something that was useless. But overall, I feel like the Charged Atmosphere passive is pretty terrible. I think it does need a buff. I mean, really, all I ever see it do is maybe break a jar every now and again, or kill a rat, a random snake maybe, but it doesn't really do anything that special. But again, that was just so we could pick up a point in Electric Shock. Now, Electric Shock, again, is really good because it helps us apply that Immobilize to our enemies, and it scales pretty decently. I think it goes up to a 15% chance with 3 points. And then it also helps increase our damage to those enemies that are immobilized. And again, because we're doing a ranged build, we kind of want to stay out of the thick of things. And I think, just keeping that immobilize up on our enemies will be very useful. Now, obviously, that doesn't work on bosses, but maybe we can. We want to basically build up that CC meter on the bosses so we can get them stunned up, and maybe that will help help us with bosses later in the game. And then as we continue on with the build, we're kind of we're chugging along here, and we start to move into our ultimate tree at level 15. Now, level 15 is a great level for druids and many other classes because we start getting those druidic spirit offerings for our boons. And we will be talking about our spirit boons and why we're using the ones that we do end up picking up. But I do like to save up my boons. I do like to save up my offerings until I have the complete 400 because I don't like making constant trips back and forth to the altar. So I will be saving those up till I have 400, and then I'll probably make a video on those boons that I choose. But I want to talk about the ultimate passive tree here for a second, and this will probably be the last thing I talk about as we kind of finish up this video here. And we're really going into this tree, A, because it helps build up some fortify for our hero to make us a little more tankier. But the real reason is unrestrained. Unrestrained, and this is the reason why I'm going to be dumping Earthen Bulwark. Unrestrained is a great passive as it gives us a reduction in duration of control impairing effects, and that reduction triples. It triples if you have over 50% fortification on your hero. And that is a massive reduction. I mean, it scales up to, I think, 9%. And so you're talking 9 times 3 because you're pretty much going to have 100% fortify all the time. You're getting 27% reduction. And we're going to pick up more impairment reduction later on with different gear pieces. But that's a big, big part of our build here because the most I ever die is from CC. But overall, that's really it for this video. As you can see, we're still moving pretty well. I will be releasing more videos for this series, and I'm pretty excited for those videos coming up. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. And with that being said, if you did enjoy it, like, share, and subscribe. And I hope to see you guys back for the second video. But with that being said, that's pretty much it, guys. And I hope you have a wonderful day. And yeah, that's it for me. Peace out, guys.